I was driving the stretch of 491 that nobody talks about anymore. The part that used to be called something else, before they changed the name and pretended that would fix it. It was just past 2 in the morning, somewhere between Gallup and Shiprock, and the desert was doing that thing it does in October, where it feels less like land and more like the bottom of a drained ocean, flat, pale, old in a way that makes your headlights look stupid for even trying. I'd been hauling refrigerated freight for 19 years at that point. Done this exact run maybe 400 times. I knew every busted guardrail, every mile marker with a bullet hole in it, every overpass where the wind tries to take your trailer. I wasn't scared of 491. I was bored of it. That night I had a full load of medical supplies out of Albuquerque. Outside temp was 38 degrees. And I was running about 6 minutes behind schedule because of a construction delay outside Gallup that had me sitting with my engine idling and my patience thinning. So I was pushing a little, not reckless, just steady. The kind of driving where your hands know what to do and your brain is somewhere else entirely. I first saw her at mile marker 67. She was standing in the median, not on the shoulder, in the median, which on that stretch of 491 is just a narrow strip of dead grass between the northbound and southbound lanes, maybe 4 feet wide. And she was just standing there facing north, her back to me, wearing something light-colored. White or pale yellow, I couldn't tell. No reflective gear, no phone light, nothing. I clocked her at maybe 200 yards out, and I did what any driver does. I moved left, gave her the full lane width, slowed about 5 miles an hour. I watched her in my driver's side mirror as I passed. She didn't move, didn't turn around. Just stood there with her arms at her sides like she was waiting for a bus that was never coming. Here's the thing about seeing a pedestrian on a divided highway at 2 in the morning in the New Mexico desert. Your first instinct isn't supernatural. It's practical. Is she broken down? Is she on something? Does she need help? I actually reached for my CB to call it in, but I was already a quarter mile past her. The road ahead was clear. I had a schedule, and I'm not proud of this. I kept going. I told myself I'd call it in at the next stop. I didn't think about her again for about 40 minutes. Then I saw her again, mile marker 109, same median strip, same pale clothes, same posture, arms down, facing north, back to me. 42 miles from where I'd first seen her, and I was the only vehicle on this road. I hit my brakes hard enough that my trailer protested. I slowed to about 30 and leaned forward on my wheel like that was going to help me see better. I passed her slow. Same woman, or what looked like the same woman. Same height, same build, same way of standing like she'd been planted there. I watched my mirror until she disappeared in the dark behind me. My hands were doing something I didn't like, this little tremble at the knuckles. I've driven through ice storms on I-80. I've had a tire blow at 70 miles an hour. My hands don't do that. I thought about turning around. I genuinely considered it. But turn around and do what exactly? Stop and ask a woman standing in the median of a desert highway at 2 a.m. if she needs directions. I kept driving. I told myself there was a rational explanation: 2 different women, coincidence of posture. My eyes playing tricks after 6 hours behind the wheel. I believed that for about 23 miles. Then I saw her a third time. And this is where it stops being a story about coincidence and starts being something I don't have a clean word for. Mile marker 132. Same woman, same position. But this time I was ready. Or I thought I was, and I slowed to 25 miles an hour and I stared at her as long as I could before she passed out of my headlights. The thing I noticed on the third pass, the thing I hadn't been close enough or calm enough to notice before. Her feet weren't quite on the ground, not floating, not dramatic, just. The grass beneath her was pressed down wrong, like the weight wasn't distributed the way it should be. Like something was slightly off in the relationship between her and the earth she was standing on. It was the kind of detail you'd dismiss instantly if you saw it once. But the third time, when your brain is already primed and frightened and looking for something to confirm what it suspects, you notice. I called my dispatcher. Got voicemail. I tried the CB, but the only thing I raised was static and, briefly, what sounded like a country station playing something instrumental and slow that I didn't recognize. I turned it off. I didn't stop driving. What I did was start talking to myself, out loud, which I hadn't done since my first year on the road when the loneliness was new. I narrated what I was seeing, the mile markers, the temperature gauge, the road ahead, just to hear a voice I recognized, just to stay anchored to the version of this night that made sense. I kept that up for about 15 miles. Then I stopped talking and just drove. There's a truck stop at the edge of Shiprock. Nothing fancy, diesel pumps. A diner with fluorescent lighting so aggressive it feels like an interrogation. A parking lot full of rigs arranged like sleeping animals. I pulled in at 3:47 a.m. and sat in my cab for a few minutes before I went inside. The diner had 4 people in it. A cook behind the counter, a woman in scrubs eating eggs and reading something on her phone, 2 booths of nothing, and an older driver sitting at the counter with coffee and a paper plate of toast, reading a folded newspaper the way people used to before everything went to screens. I took the stool 2 down from him and ordered coffee. Black. The cook poured it without asking any questions, which is the correct behavior at 3:47 a.m. I didn't plan to say anything. I was going to drink my coffee and get back in my truck and file this under long nights and bad eyes and never mention it to anyone. That was the plan. But the older driver, he had to be in his late 60s, hands like old leather, a company patch on his jacket I didn't recognize. He looked over at me the way experienced drivers look at each other when they can tell something happened on the road. There's a kind of recognition. You can't fake it and you can't really describe it. He just looked at me and said, "Rough stretch?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "491?" And something about the way he said it, not asking, just confirming, made me put my coffee down. I told him what I saw, all 3 sightings, the mile markers, the pale clothes, the way she never turned around. The thing with her feet in the grass, I told it flat, the way you tell something true rather than the way you tell something for effect. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at his coffee. Then he said, "Median, facing north?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd hoped was wrong. He told me he'd done this route for 11 years before his knees made him switch to shorter hauls, and that somewhere around his 4th or 5th year, he couldn't remember the exact date, but he knew it was October because the cold had just come in. He'd seen a woman in the median of 491, 3 times in one night. Mile markers he couldn't remember exactly, but in that same general corridor, between Gallup and Shiprock. Pale clothes, facing north, never moved. He'd asked around the same way I was asking now. And apparently, and this is the part he said like a man who'd been sitting on it for a long time, apparently he wasn't the first either. The guy who told him had been driving 491 since back when it had the other name, back in the 90s. And he'd seen her too. Same stretch, same posture, same pale clothes, always October, always north-facing, always 3 times. The older driver picked up his coffee and looked at it and said, "Nobody who sees her twice ever sees her a 4th time. You notice that? Always exactly 3. I didn't have anything to say to that. He finished his toast, left a 5 on the counter, pulled his jacket on and said, "And I've turned this over in my mind more times than I can count." He said, "I don't think she's looking for help. I think she's just there, been there a long time. Maybe she doesn't know how to leave, or maybe she's got no reason to." Either way, he left. I sat with my coffee until it went cold. I've done that run maybe 30 times since then. Different seasons, different times of night. And I'll tell you this straight, I've never seen her again. Not once. I don't know if that means anything. But every time I hit mile marker 67, I move to the left lane without thinking about it. My hands do it before my brain does, and I keep my eyes on the road ahead, not the median, because some part of me, the part that's been behind a wheel long enough to know that the road gives you exactly what you're ready for and nothing more, some part of me isn't sure I want to see whether she's there or not. 3 times, always 3. I don't know what that rule is or who made it, but I follow it now. The Tuesday route never changed. That was the whole point of it. 23 stops, same order, same roads, same mailboxes I could find blindfolded. Rural Route 4 out of Millard County, Iowa. Flat land, gravel shoulders, fields that go on so long in every direction that the horizon sun starts to feel like a threat. I'd been running it for 14 years. I knew every pothole, every aggressive dog, every farmhouse where the flag was always up even when nobody was home. I was not the kind of person things happened to. I want to be clear about that before I tell you any of this. I'm 53 years old. I balance my checkbook by hand. I have never once in my life believed in anything I couldn't hold or measure. My husband calls me the most unromantic woman in 3 counties, and he means it as a complaint, but I take it as a compliment. I don't see faces in clouds. I don't feel presences. I don't have hunches. What I have is a phone log that doesn't match my memory, and 14 years of knowing that road well enough to know what I saw. It started the way bad things usually start on a Tuesday, quietly, and without any warning at all. I left the depot at 7:14 a.m. I remember the time because I was 3 minutes late and that bothered me. The sky was that flat gray color Iowa gets in November, the kind of gray that isn't building toward anything, no rain coming, no clearing expected. Just gray all day, like the sky had given up on having an opinion. First 11 stops, nothing, routine. A few pieces of farm equipment had left deep ruts in the gravel on the county road section, and I had to slow down, but that was normal for the season. I was making good time by stop 12. I was thinking about what I was going to make for dinner. I passed the Henderson grain elevator, big rust-colored structure, you can see it from 2 miles off, and I noticed my odometer was at 47,882. I notice odometer numbers. I don't know why. It's just a habit, the way some people count stairs. I clocked it, kept driving, made stop 13 without incident. Stop 14 is a long approach. Quarter-mile driveway off the main county road, old farmhouse at the end of it, elderly couple who get a lot of seed catalogs and the occasional package. I pulled in, made the delivery, pulled back out, and that's where the day came apart. Because when I turned back onto the county road and checked my odometer, it read 47,882. The same number. I'd driven at least 3 miles since I'd last checked it. Probably closer to 4, accounting for the driveway, but the number was identical. I sat there at the end of that driveway for a moment with the engine idling and looked at it, the way you look at something you know is wrong, but aren't ready to confirm is wrong. Then I drove to stop 15. Stop 15 is the old Prentice place, a blue house set back from the road, and I pulled up to the mailbox and the flag was already up on it, which it wasn't supposed to be, because I hadn't been there yet that day. There was nothing in the box. I stood there with the mail in my hand, looking at the raised flag, and thinking very hard about being a practical woman who doesn't panic about things she can't explain. I got back in the truck. I called my husband. He picked up on the second ring. I told him something was off with my odometer, and I was running a little behind, but I'd be home by 6. He said okay and asked if I wanted him to start the chili. I said yes. We hung up. I drove to stop 16. Here's where it got bad. Stop 16 is the corner of County Road F42 and a smaller unnamed gravel track that locals just call the Millard Cutoff. There's a dead oak at the corner, hit by lightning years ago, completely split down the middle but still standing because the two halves leaned against each other. I've passed that tree approximately 3,000 times. I passed it. I continued north towards stop 17, and then I passed it again. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't slowed down, made a U-turn, reversed direction in any way. I was driving a continuous straight line north on F42 and I passed the split oak twice. I pulled over, not a gentle pullover, a hard stop, half on the gravel shoulder, engine still running. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and I breathed the way my doctor told me to breathe when my blood pressure is high, in for 4, out for 4. I looked out the windshield at a field full of stubbled corn rows and I gave myself 30 seconds to be frightened, because I am a practical woman. And practical women don't pretend they're not scared when they are. They just give it 30 seconds and then they decide what to do next. 30 seconds. Then I checked my odometer, 47,882. I called my husband again. Told him the same thing I'd told him before. Odometer issue, running behind, home by 6. He said okay, asked about the chili. I said yes. We hung up. My hands were shaking when I put the phone down. Not trembling, actually shaking like I'd been out in cold water. I pressed them flat against my thighs and looked at the road ahead and made a decision. I was going to complete my route, stop by stop, in order. I was going to deliver every piece of mail on my manifest, and I was going to drive back to the depot, and I was going to report the odometer malfunction, and that was going to be the end of it. I pulled back onto F42. I passed the split oak a third time. That's when the practical part of me went quiet and something older and more animal took over. I didn't stop again. I put my foot down and drove north as fast as the gravel would let me, 25-30 miles an hour, watching the road ahead and refusing to look at the odometer or the fields or anything but the strip of gray sky above the road ahead. My mouth was dry. I was doing arithmetic in my head. How many stops left, how long to the depot, whether I had enough signal to call someone who could actually help me, and coming up with answers that felt unstable, like the numbers themselves weren't trustworthy anymore. The road straightened out, past a small drainage ditch and the landscape opened up, and I recognized where I was. I was past stop 16, I was at the approach to stop 17, a white farmhouse with a broken weather vane, and I had been here before this morning. And I had not been here before this morning, and both of those things were true at the same time. I did stop 17 through 23 on autopilot. I don't remember them clearly. I know I did them because the mail was gone from my carrier bag, and the manifests were signed where they needed to be signed. But the memory of those stops has a quality I don't like. Thin, slightly translucent, the way dreams feel when you're trying to hold them in the first 10 minutes after waking up. The rest of that route lives in my mind like something I watched happen to someone else from a distance. I got back to the depot at 4:49 p.m., checked in, filed the odometer report, drove home. My husband was in the kitchen when I got there. He looked at me the way he's looked at me for 21 years when he knows something's wrong. And he said, "You called a lot today." I said I'd called twice. Once about the odometer, once to check on the chili. He turned the burner down and picked up his phone and showed me 7 missed calls, all from my number, spread across a 3-hour window in the middle of the day. I took his phone and looked at the call log for a long time. 7 calls, the first at 10:23 a.m., the last at 1:47 p.m. I could only remember making 2. The duration on each one was between 40 seconds and 2 minutes. Long enough to have a full conversation. Long enough to talk about odometers and chili and whatever else I apparently said. I have no memory of 6 of those calls. He said I'd sounded normal. A little distracted maybe, but normal. He said each time I'd told him approximately the same thing. Running behind, home by 6. Something was off with the truck. He'd assumed I was stressed and calling for reassurance, which he said was unlike me but not alarming. I sat down at the kitchen table and thought about the split oak. I thought about the raised flag at the Prentice place. I thought about mile 47, 882 repeating like a skipping record in a machine that had no reason to skip. I pulled up my own phone log. 1 outgoing call. My husband's number. 10:23 a.m. Duration 4 minutes and 11 seconds. 1 call. 1. I took 2 weeks off after that. Told them it was a family thing and they didn't push. I spent a lot of those 2 weeks sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, thinking about the architecture of what happened, trying to find the place where it broke down, trying to find the version of that Tuesday that made mechanical sense. I haven't found it. I went back to the route in December. I've run it every Tuesday since. The split oak is still there, both halves leaning against each other like they need the support. The odometer behaves normally. The Prentice flag is up or down depending on whether they have outgoing mail. I have not had another day like that Tuesday. But here's the thing about being a practical woman. You learn to carry what you can't explain such in the same way you carry everything else, quietly, without making a production of it, filed away in the part of your mind where you put the things that don't have a folder yet. You go back to work. You balance your checkbook. You answer when your husband asks what you're thinking about, and you say nothing because the truth is too strange and too shapeless, and you're still not sure it belongs to you. But sometimes, on the long stretches of F42 where the fields go on forever and the road ahead is perfectly straight and perfectly empty, I check my odometer, not because I expect anything, just because it's a habit now, just to make sure the number changes. The deposition ran 4 hours longer than it should have because the opposing counsel was the kind of man who believed that exhausting people was a strategy. By the time I got to my car, it was 11:47 at night. The parking garage was empty in the way that makes your footsteps sound like someone else's. And I had a 3-hour drive back to the city on a tank of gas I'd been meaning to fill since Thursday. I almost called a car service. I want to say that clearly because it matters. I almost didn't drive that night at all. I was tired in the specific way that long depositions make you tired, not physically but cognitively, like someone had gone into your brain with a spoon and scraped the useful parts out. But my assistant had rescheduled my 7 a.m. meeting to 8:30, which gave me an extra hour, and I'd made this drive 100 times, and the car service would have taken 40 minutes just to arrive. So I drove. The first 90 minutes were fine. Highway 9 West, then the connector onto the main interstate. I had the radio on low, something I wasn't really listening to, and I was running deposition questions through my head the way I always do after. What I'd asked, what I should have asked, what the witness's hands were doing when he lied about the third quarter numbers. This is how my brain unwinds. It goes back over the work. I've never been able to stop it, so I stopped trying years ago. I pulled off at a rest stop around the 90-minute mark because the coffee I'd had at 2 in the afternoon had made a decision about my bladder. 5 minutes, back on the road. I noted it was 1:18 a.m. when I pulled back onto the on-ramp. And that is the last completely normal moment of that drive. He was standing at the on-ramp, not hitchhiking, not with his thumb out or a sign or anything like that. just standing at the edge of the on-ramp where it meets the highway, in the small wedge of darkness between the rest stoplights and the highway proper. He was wearing a suit, dark, well-fitted, the kind you'd wear to a client meeting, not to stand on the side of a highway at 1 in the morning. I nearly missed him entirely. My headlights caught him at the last second, and I had maybe 2.5 seconds to make a decision. Sensible answer was to keep going. Every instinct I've developed in 20 years of reading people in professional settings. The practice of watching a witness and knowing within 60 seconds whether they are lying, performing, or genuinely afraid. Every one of those instincts said keep going. But there was something about the suit. Something about a person dressed that way, standing in that particular spot, at that particular hour, that made me think. Breakdown. Accident. Someone who needs a phone. Someone who looks like they should be in a conference room and instead is standing in the dark on a highway on-ramp. I pulled over. He got in the passenger seat without hesitation. That was the first thing that was wrong. No thank you, no explanation, no I'm so sorry to bother you, which is what normal people say when they've flagged down a stranger at 1 a.m. He just opened the door, sat down, closed it, and looked at the road ahead. 50s, I estimated, maybe early 60s, gray at the temples, clean-shaven. The suit was good quality, not flashy, but the kind of thing that costs real money and is cut to look like it didn't. He smelled faintly of paper and something else I couldn't identify. Not cologne, something drier. I said, "Where are you headed?" He said, "You're going back to the city." That's fine, not yes. The city works, or that would be great. Just a statement. A confirmation of something he already knew. I told myself he'd just seen my plates and made an educated inference. Metro County tags, late night on this particular stretch of highway. Reasonable guess. I pulled back onto the highway. For the first few minutes he said nothing. I said nothing. I had the radio on so low it was barely there, and I turned it off because the silence felt like it needed to be more honest than background noise would allow. He sat with his hands resting on his knees and looked at the road with the patient expression of someone who has done a great deal of waiting in their life and made peace with it. Then he said, "The Kellerman case." I want you to understand what those 3 words meant. The Kellerman case was not public record. It hadn't been filed yet. The deposition I'd just sat through for 4 hours was part of discovery for a civil proceeding that had not been formally entered into any court system accessible to anyone who wasn't directly party to it. My client's name was not Kellerman. The case was indexed internally under a reference number. I had not discussed it by name with anyone outside my immediate team, and my team was 3 people. I said, "I don't know what you're referring to." "Which is what you say, always, automatic," he said, "the financial restructuring, the 3 subsidiaries, the question of which signatures predate the filing." My hands adjusted on the wheel. Small movement, controlled. I was in the passing lane doing 72 miles an hour, and the nearest other car was a distant pair of taillights. And I was thinking with the part of my brain that doesn't panic, the part that cross-examines, the part that looks for the mechanism. He has a source inside my firm. That was the first thought. Someone talked. Paralegal associate, someone who saw a document they shouldn't have. It happens. The world is full of people who know things they shouldn't. That's what I told myself. I said I don't discuss active matters. He nodded, like I'd said something predictable, like he was grading my response and found it adequate but not impressive. Then he said my client's name, the full name, first, last, middle initial, the name that appeared on internal communications and retainer agreements and nowhere else. The car felt very small suddenly. The highway ahead felt very long. I said, "Who are you?" He didn't answer directly. What he did was describe the opposing counsel, the man I'd spent 4 hours across a table from that evening, with a level of physical and behavioral specificity that you could only have if you'd been in that room. He described a gesture the man made when he was stalling, a specific way of touching his left cufflink. He described the water glass my client had been given and the fact that it had a small chip in the rim that nobody mentioned. I had not told anyone about the chip in the rim. I'd noticed it because I noticed things. It hadn't gone in my notes. I said, "You were there." He said, "No." I said, "Then how?" He said, "Ask me something only your client would know." I want to tell you I kept my composure. Professionally, I did. My voice didn't change. My driving didn't change. The part of me that functions in adversarial rooms stayed fully operational. But there's a version of fear that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't spike your heart rate or make you sweat. It just arrives and sits down at the base of your spine and stays there, very still, very cold, and waits to see what you'll do next. I asked him something. A specific thing, a piece of information my client had shared with me in our very first meeting, in my office, with no one else present. The kind of detail that exists only between an attorney and a client in the first hour of a professional relationship. I'm not going to say what it was, he answered correctly. The silence after that lasted about 40 seconds. I counted. Then he said, she shouldn't settle, whatever they offer. The third signature doesn't hold, I said. Why are you telling me this? He looked out the passenger window at the dark fields going past. He said, because the right outcome matters more than the comfortable one. It usually does. I said, who sent you? He said, nobody sends me anywhere. The city lights started appearing on the horizon maybe 20 minutes later. That low orange smear that means you're close. I was watching the road and turning everything over in my mind with the obsessive precision I usually reserve for briefs. Source analysis. How he could know. Who he was connected to. What he wanted. I'd settled on a theory by the time the first real exit signs appeared. Elaborate. Motivated. Someone with access to information through channels I hadn't mapped yet. I said, I'm going to need your name. If any of what you've said tonight is relevant to an active proceeding. I looked over. The seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. The road was highway 65 miles an hour. No sound, no movement. The seatbelt was lying across the seat the way it does when nobody has used. I took the next exit and sat in a gas station parking lot for 11 minutes. I checked the back seat. I got out and checked the road behind me for a quarter mile on foot, which in retrospect was not my most rational decision. There was nothing. No figure on the shoulder, no sign of a person. I drove home. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I did what I do when I need to verify something. I investigated. I ran the name he'd given me, the name he offered when I asked who he was, the only personal information he'd volunteered the entire drive. I want to tell you the name led somewhere innocuous. A LinkedIn profile, a bar association listing, anything that would give me a mechanism and let me close the file on that night. The name came back to an obituary, local paper, small notice, the kind they run when there isn't much family left to write anything longer. The date on the obituary was 3 days after that drive. The GPS rerouted without me touching it somewhere outside of Zanesville, and I remember thinking it was a signal issue because that stretch of Ohio is the kind of place where your phone loses confidence in itself. We'd been on the road for 6 hours. My daughter was asleep in the back seat with her mouth open and her stuffed rabbit wedged under her chin, and my son had been unconscious since Columbus, earbuds in, hoodie pulled up, 11 years old and already professionally unapproachable. My wife was at home. She'd stayed back to deal with a work thing, some audit that materialized at the last minute, and it was just me and the kids, driving out to see my in-laws in western Pennsylvania, a trip we'd made a dozen times, a road I knew well enough to not need the GPS at all, which is probably why it took me longer than it should have to notice what the GPS was doing. It wasn't rerouting around traffic. There was no orange construction icon, no accident notification, none of the usual reasons it deviates. It had simply decided, quietly and without explanation, to take me somewhere different. The blue line on the screen had shifted. The turn it was suggesting was not a turn I recognized. I ignored it the first time, stayed on my route. It recalculated, gave me the new turn again, firmer this time the way GPS does when it's decided you've made a mistake. I ignored it again. It recalculated a third time, same turn. And this time I noticed something that made me look at the screen a little longer than I should have while driving. The destination field, which I had not touched since I'd set it for my in-laws' address 400 miles ago, now showed a different address entirely. Not my in-laws, something else. A street number and a road name I didn't recognize, somewhere in a county I couldn't immediately place. I figured it was a glitch. Software does strange things. I cleared it, re-entered my in-laws' address and kept driving. 20 minutes later it happened again. Same address. Back in the destination field. A county road designation and a number, 4 digits, low, the kind of address that belongs to rural property. I hadn't entered it. I hadn't touched the screen. The kids were asleep. There was nobody else in the car. I pulled over at a wide gravel shoulder and sat there with the hazards going, looking at the address on the screen. Something about it bothered me in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. Not fear. I wasn't scared yet, not at this point. Just a low-grade wrongness, the kind you feel when a piece of a puzzle is in the right general area but oriented incorrectly. I typed the address into the search bar instead of the navigation, just to see what it was, just to give it a face. The search came back with almost nothing. A county parcel record. No photos, no street view, no listing history. Just a parcel number and a land description and a last recorded transaction date. I sat with that for a moment. Then I re-entered my in-laws' address and pulled back onto the highway. The kids slept through the next hour. I drove and drank cold gas station coffee and told myself the address thing was a software anomaly, which it almost certainly was. Apps glitch. Data gets cached from previous users if you're using a shared device profile. We shared an account, my wife and I, for the family plan. Maybe she'd entered an address once. Maybe it was a work location, a client's property, something mundane that had gotten stuck in the system. I was 90% satisfied with that explanation. Then my daughter woke up and asked if we were almost there, and I said about 2 more hours, and she accepted this and went back to sleep, and the GPS quietly, with no notification, rerouted again. Same address. And this time the name of the county was visible on the map. And I recognized it, and the recognition was the thing that knocked the 90% down to nothing. It was the county my wife grew up in. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because I think it matters. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like vertigo. The sensation of a floor proving itself to be less solid than previously advertised. My wife and I had been together for 14 years. We'd met in graduate school. I knew her family, I'd been to her hometown. I knew the rough geography of her childhood, the way you know a place you visited but never lived. The outlines, not the texture. She'd never mentioned this address. I didn't call her. It was almost 11 at night, and the kids were in the car, and I didn't have a question that was ready yet. I had a feeling and a parcel number and a GPS that wouldn't stop pointing at something I didn't know existed. What I did, and I'm aware this was not rational, was follow it. The kids were out. The detour the GPS wanted would add maybe 40 minutes. My in-laws weren't expecting us until the next morning anyway. We'd planned to arrive late and sleep. I told myself I was just going to look, drive past, see what was there, give the wrongness a physical address it could live at so I could stop carrying it around in my chest. I took the turn. The county road was unlit and unpaved, and my headlights turned it into a pale tunnel between 2 walls of old-growth trees. The GPS counted down the distance with the calm authority of something that had been waiting for me to do this. My daughter shifted in her sleep. My son's music was a faint tinny leak from his earbuds. The destination arrived with the usual chime. There was nothing there. Nothing like an empty field, nothing like a site. The remnants of a foundation, mostly overtaken by grass and scrub growth. A concrete slab with black staining across it that I recognized after a moment as old fire damage. A chimney standing alone, disconnected from any structure, the way chimneys do when everything else burns and only the brick is left. And a mailbox, still standing, which seemed improbable given the state of everything around it. Metal post, slightly rusted, the flag broken off, and on the side of it, in reflective adhesive letters that had started to peel but were still mostly legible, a name. My wife's maiden name, not a common name. Not the kind you find by coincidence on a mailbox in the dark in a county you navigated to by following a GPS that rerouted itself. Her exact maiden name. I parked and sat there for a long time with the engine running, and the headlights pointed at the foundation of something that had burned down a long time ago. I thought about the parcel record. Last transaction, 1987. I thought about being 14 years into knowing someone and discovering that knowing someone is not the same as knowing everything about them, and that the gap between those two things can be geographical and physical, and located at the end of a county road with a mailbox that has their name on it. I didn't get out of the car. The kids were there and the place was dark in a way that had weight to it. And I am not a man who dramatizes things, but I didn't want to get out of the car. I took a photo of the mailbox with my phone. Then I re-entered my in-laws' address, drove 42 minutes back to the highway, and got to Pennsylvania at 1:30 in the morning. I didn't say anything to my wife for 4 days. I don't know exactly why. Something about needing to be sure of what I was asking before I asked it, needing to frame it precisely, the way you approach a sensitive witness. On the 4th day, I showed her the photo. She was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then she told me about the house. Her parents had owned it before she was born, a property her father had inherited from his family. They'd lived there briefly. She was an infant. She had no memory of it before the house burned in late 1987. An electrical fire, middle of the night. Her family got out. The property sat after that. Her parents never talked about it, and eventually she stopped asking, and it became the kind of family history that gets filed under things too heavy to carry, so you set them down and walk past the pile every year, and pretend it isn't growing. She didn't know how the address had gotten into the GPS. She hadn't entered it. She said she didn't think she'd ever typed that address in her life because she'd spent most of her adult life trying to maintain a reasonable distance from her parents' grief. I believe her. I do. But here's the thing I haven't said out loud to her. The thing I've turned over privately since that night on the county road. The address appeared 3 times. It waited until the kids were asleep. It took me to a place that had a connection to my family I didn't know about. And it did all of this on a night when my wife wasn't there. GPS doesn't do that. Software doesn't do that. Clash data doesn't do that. I don't know what does. I cleared the navigation history when we got home, deleted the app and reinstalled it from scratch. The address has never appeared again. But I kept the photo of the mailbox. I'm not sure why. Maybe because having something you can't explain in a form you can hold makes it feel slightly less like it owns you. Maybe just so I know I didn't imagine it. The name is still there on the mailbox, peeling at the edges but legible. It'll outlast the chimney, I think. It might outlast a lot of things. The gig had gone well, which almost made everything that happened after worse, because good nights have a particular kind of energy that makes you feel insulated from bad things, and I was riding that feeling hard when I got on the highway. It was a Thursday, late October. I'd played a 2-hour set at a venue in Reno. Small place, maybe 140 people. The kind of room where the sound bounces off the walls and comes back to you warm instead of hollow. I'd been touring solo for 3 years at that point, which means I'd been driving alone at night for 3 years, which means I was comfortable with it, in the way you get comfortable with something that was frightening at first and eventually becomes just the texture of your life. Nevada at 3 a.m. Empty road, flat dark, the occasional set of headlights going the other way, like a message in a language you don't speak. I had about 4 hours of driving between me and home. I wasn't tired. Post-gig adrenaline takes at least 2 hours to drain, and until it does, your body thinks it's still mid-afternoon. I had water. I had a bag of almonds. I had a playlist I'd built specifically for long desert drives. Everything was correct. Everything was in order. The radio was off because I had my own music through the aux cable, but somewhere around the 40-minute mark, the aux stopped working. Not the cable, the jack itself. My car had been doing this intermittently for a month, a loose connection that would cut out on rough road. I'd been meaning to get it fixed and hadn't, because I am 24 years old. And there is always something more urgent than the thing you should actually do. So I switched to the radio, scanned until I found something tolerable, a classic rock station out of somewhere. Signal a little wobbly, but good enough. I left it there and drove. For about 20 minutes it was fine. Then the signal started breaking up the way desert radio does, fading in and out as the station slipped behind geography or distance or whatever it is that makes signals fail in the middle of nowhere. I reached for the scan button to find something else. The scan stopped on static. Not a station, just static. White noise, low and steady. I hit scan again. It moved forward, landed on more static. Again, static. I ran the scan all the way around the dial, and every frequency came back with the same flat white noise, which isn't how radio works. Radio doesn't fail that uniformly. There's always something, a distant country station, a Spanish language frequency, a religious broadcast, something. Total static on every frequency is a hardware problem. I assumed it was the car. Same electrical issue as the aux jack, something loose, something failing. I turned the radio off and drove in silence and thought about the set, and whether the bridge in the second song had landed the way I'd intended. About 10 minutes later, in the silence, I heard it, or rather, I felt the silence change. The way a room changes when someone walks into it before you see them. There was a quality difference in the quiet, a density that wasn't there before. I reached over and checked that the radio was definitely off. It was. The screen was dark. The volume knob was at 0, and then music started, not loud, not sudden. The way music starts when you've had earbuds in and forgotten about them. Gradual, like it was always there and you just started paying attention. Coming from the speakers, from a radio that was off. I turned the volume knob. Nothing happened. The sound didn't respond to the knob at all. It just played. I want to tell you I pulled over immediately. I didn't. I drove and I listened, and the reason I kept driving instead of stopping is that the music was, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I've lost my mind. It was familiar in a way that stopped my hands from doing anything sensible. It was a guitar part, finger-picked, in a tuning I use specifically because I developed it myself over about 2 years of experimentation. not a standard tuning, not something you'd arrive at accidentally. A specific idiosyncratic way of holding the instrument that produces a sound that is mine the way my voice is mine, I told myself. Cover. Someone found the same tuning. Coincidence of technique. Then the chord progression started, and coincidence stopped being available to me as an explanation. The progression was something I'd written in my apartment 6 weeks earlier at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. I'd sat on the edge of my bed with my acoustic guitar and no recording device and worked through a sequence of chords for about an hour until they resolved into something that felt right. Then I'd gone to sleep. I hadn't written them down. I hadn't recorded them even on my phone because I was half asleep. And I'd told myself I'd remember in the morning. I did remember in the morning. I remembered them precisely because they'd felt significant in the way that some things you make in the dark feel significant, like they came from somewhere deeper than conscious decision. I'd been carrying them around in my head for 6 weeks, playing them in sound checks when nobody was listening, not ready yet to make them into a finished song. Those chords were playing on my radio, my turned-off radio, in the middle of the Nevada desert at 3:15 in the morning. I pulled over then, hard stop, gravel, shoulder hazards and on. I sat in the sudden stillness of a stopped car with music playing from no source, and I ran every rational explanation I had in sequence, the way you run through a checklist when something is wrong with equipment mid-show. Bluetooth. Did I have Bluetooth audio connected to something? I checked. Bluetooth was off. Hadn't been on since I'd used it at the venue's soundboard hours ago. A song that happened to match. Could another guitarist have written the same progression? Possible in theory. But the tuning, both the tuning and the progression, the probability of that combination was, I did the math in the approximate way my brain does math, which is imprecise but directional. It was essentially 0. The music kept playing. And then came the part that moved it out of the category of strange and into the category of something I don't have a name for. Lyrics, sung in a voice that wasn't quite mine but was close enough to mine that it felt like hearing a recording of yourself, that uncanny quality where you recognize the voice as yours while simultaneously feeling certain it belongs to a stranger. And the words. I had never written words to this progression. In 6 weeks of carrying it around, I had specifically not tried to write lyrics because it didn't feel ready, because the music was still just music and forcing language onto it too early is how you kill something that needs more time. So there were no words. There were never any words. But the voice was singing words, and they were right. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing I can't explain away no matter how many rational frameworks I construct around it. The lyrics were right. They fit the music the way the right word fits the right sentence. Not adequately, not coincidentally, but precisely, inevitably, the way things fit when they were always supposed to be together. The imagery was mine. The line breaks were mine. The specific emotional territory, a particular kind of loss I'd been circling for 2 years without being able to name it, was mine. Whoever or whatever was singing had finished the song I didn't know I was writing. I sat on the shoulder of that Nevada highway for 22 minutes. I know it was 22 because I was watching the clock with the focused attention of someone trying to hold on to any piece of measurable reality. The music played through to what felt like a natural ending. No fade out, no loop, just a resolution, the last chord ringing and then the silence of the desert coming back like something exhaling. Then nothing. The radio screen was dark. The speakers were silent. I turned the volume knob up experimentally, static, normal, frequency dependent, the way radio static is supposed to be. I didn't have a recording device ready. I hadn't hit record on my phone. By the time the thought occurred to me, the music was already gone, which is the cruelest part of this, the part that makes me feel most like I'm trying to describe a dream after you've lost most of it. I can tell you the emotional shape of what I heard. I can hum the guitar part. I can tell you the feeling the lyrics produced in me. But I can't prove any of it. I can't replay it. I can't show you. I finished the drive home. 3.5 more hours in complete silence, aux and radio both off. The desert going dark and then slowly pale as the sky started considering morning. When I got home, I sat down with my guitar immediately, while whatever residue of that night was still on me, and I tried to reconstruct what I'd heard. The chords were easy. I already had those. But the lyrics, I got fragments, images, the emotional register of what they'd been reaching for, not the words themselves, not precisely. They were like something seen through fogged glass, recognizable as the right shape, but blurred at every edge where the detail lived. I spent 3 months trying to write that song properly. Finished version is on my last record, third track. A lot of people have told me it's the best thing I've ever written. I don't know how to feel about that, because I'm not sure I wrote it. I'm not sure it was mine to write. Whatever came through that radio in the dark on a Wednesday night on a Nevada highway, it knew the song better than I did. It knew exactly what I was trying to say, and it said it cleanly and without hesitation. I just followed it home. The woman smiled at me like she knew exactly who I was, and that was the moment I should have left. That was the moment every reasonable instinct I had should have gathered itself up and walked me back out through that diner door and put me back in my truck and put miles between me and that county road and whatever was happening inside that building. I didn't leave. I sat down. That's the part I have to live with. I do overnight runs. Have for 11 years. Rural routes mostly. The kind of work that doesn't appeal to a lot of people because it's lonely and the pay isn't spectacular and you spend a lot of your life in the dark on roads that don't have names on maps, just county designations and the occasional hand-painted sign pointing toward a farm. I chose it deliberately. I wanted the quiet. After everything that happened with the accident, I wanted roads with no witnesses and hours with no conversation, and a job where the only measure of whether you'd done it right was whether the packages arrived. The accident was 10 years ago. Not my fault, that's what the investigation concluded, and I believe the investigation. I do. But there are things that are technically not your fault that you still carry, because you were the one behind the wheel, and the other person wasn't anymore. And the law's version of fault and your own body's version of fault are two entirely different documents, written in two entirely different languages. I never reported it. I know how that sounds. I've known how it sounds for 10 years. The diner appeared at around 3 a.m. on a Thursday in March, which is when I was on a rural stretch of Route 7 in a part of the state where I didn't expect anything to be open, let alone a diner. But there it was. Low building, gravel lot, the kind of yellow light in the windows that looks warm from outside and institutional from inside. My truck needed fuel anyway, and I'd been on the road for 6 hours, and there are limits to how long you can sustain yourself on gas station coffee, and a kind of grim professional determination. I pulled in. 3 other vehicles in the lot, a pickup with a cracked taillight, a sedan with out-of-state plates, something under a tarp that I couldn't identify. Normal enough for a rural diner at 3 a.m. I went inside. The place smelled like coffee and old fryer oil and something underneath both of those that I couldn't name. Something faintly sweet, almost medicinal, like cleaning product that hadn't quite aired out. 4 tables, a counter with 6 stools, a pass-through window to the kitchen. A man in his 70s sat at the far end of the counter eating something I couldn't see from the door. A couple in a booth near the window, not talking, both looking at the table, and a waitress behind the counter. She looked up when I came in and smiled. The smile was the first wrong thing. Not the smile itself, the recognition in it. The specific quality of someone seeing a face they know rather than a face that's walked into their workplace. It was directed, personal, the kind of smile that has history in it. I didn't recognize her. I sat at the counter 2 stools down from the old man, and she came over with a coffee pot and poured without asking, which is normal diner behavior. And I looked at her while she poured and tried to place her and couldn't. Late 30s, maybe 40, dark hair pulled back, a small scar on her left forearm about 2 inches long, the pale, flat kind that's been there long enough to become part of the landscape of a person. I looked at the scar for 1 second longer than I should have. She set the coffee pot down and said, "You take it black, no sugar." "I do take it black, no sugar." I said, "Have we met?" She said, "What would you like to eat?" I ordered eggs because it was the first word that came to me. She wrote it down and went to the pass-through, and I sat with my coffee and tried to run through the practical explanations. Regular customer who I didn't remember. Someone who knew me. A lucky guess on the coffee. Plenty of people take it black. The scar was harder to explain away. Not because scars are unusual, but because of where I knew it from. I knew it from a specific context that I couldn't access cleanly, the way you know a fact but can't remember where you learned it. I'd seen that scar before. I was certain of it. The certainty arrived without the accompanying information, which is worse, in a way, than not being certain at all. She brought my eggs 8 minutes later, set the plate down and straightened the fork and said, "You're still doing the overnight runs." Not a question. I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Route 7, you come through here sometimes." And that was plausible. That was completely plausible. I run Route 7 every few weeks. Reasonable that a diner on the route would recognize a repeat driver. I accepted it because I needed to accept something. I ate my eggs. She refilled my coffee without being asked, and I watched her the way I watch everything on the overnight routes. Not obviously, just peripherally, the ongoing low-level cataloging you do when you've spent a decade alone in the dark and developed the habit of noticing. The way she moved was efficient, practiced. The way she spoke to the old man at the end of the counter was easy and familiar. She laughed at something he said. A genuine laugh, not a service laugh, and the sound of it landed on me strangely. I knew that laugh. I was sure of it before I could tell myself not to be sure of it. Not similar, not reminds me of, identical. The specific frequency and shape of a laugh I had heard before in a different place, in a context I was now trying very hard not to approach directly. I looked at the scar again, and the memory that had been refusing to surface all night came up all at once, the way submerged things do. Not gradually but completely, fully formed, arriving with all its weight at once. 10 years ago. A 2-lane road in early November. Rain, which is relevant, because the rain was why I didn't see her until I was already past the point where seeing her would have changed anything. She'd been crossing. The investigation said she came from between parked vehicles. The investigation said my speed was appropriate for conditions. The investigation confirmed I had no time to stop. She was 31. She had dark hair. She had a scar on her left forearm from a childhood accident. I knew this because I had researched her afterward obsessively, the way you research the person whose death you are technically not responsible for, but cannot stop thinking about. I knew her approximate height and what she did for work, and that she had a sister in another state who had never come forward publicly but whose name I knew from a local news piece that ran 2 weeks after the accident. I had never seen a photo of her that clearly showed her face. I put money on the counter. Too much money, I didn't count it. I just put what was in my pocket onto the counter and stood up. And I was completely calm in the way that extreme situations sometimes make you calm. The way your brain makes a deal with your body that says you can fall apart later. But right now we need to move. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water on my wrists. I looked at myself in the mirror for a while. I thought about the scar. I thought about the laugh. I thought about the way she'd said you still do the overnight runs, not like a diner employee, recognizing a regular, but like someone who's been watching the years accumulate, who knows what your life became after a night that changed everything. I thought about the fact that she hadn't seemed angry. That was the thing I couldn't process. No anger, no accusation, no confrontation. Just the coffee poured the right way, and the eggs and the refill, and a smile that had history in it. The kind of presence that isn't threatening, that is, if anything, almost forgiving in its steadiness. I don't know what I would have said to her. I don't know what there is to say that starts to touch 10 years of weight. But I thought of something. Not enough, but something. And I dried my hands and opened the bathroom door and went back out. Her section of the counter was empty. The coffee pot was on its burner. The old man was still at the far end. The couple in the booth hadn't moved. I asked the old man where the waitress went. He looked up from his plate and said there'd been no waitress on tonight. Counter service only. Manager covered it himself. Guy in the kitchen. He nodded toward the pass-through. I looked at the pass-through. A heavy-set man in his 50s looked back at me, no expression, clearly the only staff member who'd been here all night. I looked at the counter where my money was. It was still there. The coffee cup had been refilled. I've driven Route 7 maybe 30 times since that night. Same stretch, same approximate hour, same gravel lot where I stop if I need to. The diner is always dark. Closed has been for years by the look of it. Windows boarded. Lot overgrown at the edges, the sign above the door missing its letters. I don't stop there anymore. I don't take that exit at all if I can help it. But sometimes, on bad nights, on the nights when the weight of 10 years sits somewhere in my chest and won't move, I think about the way she smiled when I walked in. Not like she was waiting for an apology. Not like she was keeping score. Just like she saw me. After all this time, she just saw me. And I don't know if that's the most frightening thing about that night or the only mercy in it. The first thing I noticed was the positioning of the legs. Not the animal itself. I saw that a second later in full, and I'll get to what that was. But the legs first, because I am a taxidermist and legs are where the lie always lives. 17 years of working with animal bodies has given me a specific and involuntary way of looking at four-legged creatures. The way a structural engineer can't look at a building without reading the load points. The way a surgeon, probably, Can't shake someone's hand without feeling the tendons. I see proportion and joint angle and weight distribution before I see the animal. It's not something I chose. It's just what the work did to my eyes over time. The legs were wrong before anything else was wrong. It was a Friday night in late September on a back road in Carroll County, Arkansas. A stretch I know well because I've driven it for 20 years, first as a kid in my father's truck, and then as my own person with my own truck, and my own reasons for being on roads that don't get maintained as often as they should. I was coming back from a job in Eureka Springs, a mounted black bear that a hunting lodge wanted repositioned on its base. 3 hours of work that should have been 2. But the original mounting had been done badly, and I'd had to partially redo it before I could do what they'd actually paid me for. I was tired and ready to be home, and the Ozarks at 10:30 at night are dark in a way that feels personal, like the dark is specifically for you and not just an absence of light. I came around a curve and the deer was in the road. My foot went to the brake automatically. Not a panic stop. I wasn't going fast enough for that. Just the trained response of someone who's driven these roads long enough to know that deer are a constant negotiation. I slowed to about 15 and put my high beams on and watched it. It was standing in the center of the road facing away from me. A doe by the body shape, no antlers, the right general size. My headlights lit up the reflective tape on the road markers on either side of it and made the animal itself slightly difficult to read in the contrast. I waited. Deer usually move. They stand, they register the light in the engine, and then they make a decision, which is either to bolt into the trees or to stand there and be more trouble. This one didn't move. After about 20 seconds, I tapped the horn. Light tap, not aggressive, just enough to introduce a sound. Deer don't like sudden sound. It didn't react. And that's when my eyes started doing their professional thing, the involuntary reading of an animal body. And the legs came into focus, and something in my chest went cold and careful. The hind legs were too long, not dramatically, not cartoonishly, not in a way that would register to most people as wrong. But I have measured thousands of deer. I have skinned them and cleaned them and rebuilt them on wire armatures, and I know what the ratio of hindquarter to body length is supposed to look like, and on this animal the ratio was off. The hind legs were extended slightly beyond where they should be, giving the back half of the body a quality I can only describe as stretched. Like something that had been a deer had been adjusted. Like a model built from a reference photo where the reference photo was slightly distorted. I told myself old animal, unusual specimen, genetic variation. My field has taught me that bodies aren't standardized. There's a natural range of variation in every species, and I'd seen outliers before. I drove forward slowly, watched it in my headlights. It still didn't move. I got within maybe 40 feet and stopped again. From this distance, I could see the texture of the coat, which was normal. Good winter coat coming in, the right brown-gray for this time of year. Appropriate density. The ears were up, which should mean it was alert, which should mean it was about to move. It didn't move. Here is where I have to be honest about something. I got out of the car. I know exactly how that sounds, and I have played back the decision many times, and I cannot fully explain it, except to say that professional curiosity is a stronger drug than people give it credit for. I have spent 17 years wanting to understand what I'm looking at. It is the foundational impulse of the work. When something is wrong with an animal body, I want to know what's wrong with it. It is not a thought-through response. It is a reflex. I got out, left the engine running, headlights on. The road was empty in both directions. The trees on either side were close. This section of Carroll County Road has old growth right up to the shoulder, the canopy almost meeting overhead, and at night it makes a tunnel of the road that feels enclosed and deliberate. I walked toward it. At 30 feet I stopped. The coat was right. The ears were right. But the head was angled at a degree that wasn't consistent with an alert posture. Not looking at me, not looking away, tilted, like a hinge had been used improperly. Like the relationship between the neck and the skull had been decided by someone working from a description of a deer rather than from having seen one. At 20 feet I could see the eye. One eye, the right one, visible from my angle. It was too large. Not the iris, the whole eye, the orbit, the socket. Deer eyes are large proportionally, which is why they photograph with that characteristic expression of permanent startled gentleness. But this was beyond proportion. The eye occupied more of the skull than it should, which gave the side of the head a quality that my brain kept trying to resolve as normal, and kept failing to. Like an error in a drawing that you can't identify until someone points to it, and then you can't stop seeing it. I stopped at maybe 12 feet, 12 feet is the distance I want you to hold in your mind, because it's close. It is an intimate distance for a wild animal. It is the distance at which you can see breath, and I was watching for breath. The way the chest wall moves, the small cloud of it in cool September air, and I could not find it. No breath movement, no chest expansion, no vapor. And then at 12 feet, after however long I'd been standing there, it moved. Not the way a deer moves. Deer movement is a translation of nervous energy. Sudden, all or nothing, the whole animal reorganizing in an instant. This was different. This was slow, deliberate. The head turned toward me and the neck moved with it, and the quality of the movement was mechanical in a way I don't have a better word for. Like watching something that had learned motion from studying motion, rather than from having a body that wanted to move. It turned its head and looked at me with that eye, and I walked backward to my truck. I didn't run. Running felt like the wrong thing to do, the way that certain situations inform you of their own rules without explaining them. I walked backward, kept my eyes on it, reached my truck, got in, closed the door. It was still standing in the road. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and then I drove. Not fast. I couldn't go fast because it was still in the road, and some survival instinct told me that contact with it was something I should avoid. I edged left, gave it the full opposite lane, watched it in my peripheral vision as I passed it. As I came level with it, the head tracked me. That smooth mechanical rotation, keeping pace with the car. Both of us moving, it standing. The head turning at exactly the right speed to maintain the angle between us. I looked in my mirror as I accelerated away. It was still standing in the center of the road, facing the direction I'd come from, still. Already returned to whatever it was doing before I arrived. I got home at midnight. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I was doing what I do when something stays with me. I pulled up satellite imagery of that section of Carroll County Road, which sounds like an odd response, but my mind had fixed on the tree line, on how close the canopy was, on what that kind of enclosed corridor might attract or provide cover for. The satellite image was from 18 months prior, standard enough. Tree line, road, fields east of the tree corridor. But in the trees, maybe 60 yards from the road at the approximate location of that curve, there was a structure, low, rectangular, partially covered by canopy overhang. Not a barn. The footprint was wrong for that. Too narrow, too long. No access road. No utility lines running to it. I cross-referenced county records for that parcel. The parcel is registered to an LLC with a name I searched and found nothing for. No web presence, no filing history beyond the initial registration, no associated names. The structure doesn't appear on any county map. It's not a hunting blind. Those don't get built at that scale. It's not a storage facility because there's no vehicle access. I don't know what it is. I haven't driven that stretch of Carroll County Road since September. I've driven roads like it 1,000 times, and I'll drive them again. But not that one. Not yet. Some things you get 12 feet from, and you understand that 12 feet was already too close. That the distance you kept wasn't caution. It was luck. And luck doesn't repeat itself just because you were grateful for it the first time. The footage is 43 minutes long, and I have watched it maybe 200 times. Not because I enjoy it. Not because I'm looking for something I haven't found yet. I stopped believing I'd find a new explanation around the 100th viewing. I watch it because there is something in me that refuses to let it be true without witnesses. And since I can't show it to most people without having a conversation I'm not prepared to have, I watch it myself. I sit with it. I let it be true in the company of at least one person. That person is me. That has to be enough. I should explain the truck first. I drove long haul for 26 years. Started when I was 29, came over from Croatia with my wife and not much else. And the trucking work was available and I was willing, and that was the whole negotiation. I'm not a man who needed the work to mean something. I needed it to pay, and it paid. And over 26 years, it became the shape of my life, the way any repeated thing becomes the shape of your life, whether you planned it that way or not. The truck was a 2019 Kenworth. I'd had it for 4 years. It was not a sentimental object, it was equipment. And I maintained it well because poorly maintained equipment is how people die, and I am a practical man. The dash cam was standard, forward-facing and cab-facing both, motion-activated, running on a loop that overwrites every 72 hours unless something triggers the save function. Hard braking triggers a save. Impact triggers a save. On the night of November 14th, something triggered a save. I was not in the truck on November 14th. That's the first thing. The foundational thing that everything else rests on. The truck was parked at the depot in Harrisburg. I'd come in the previous evening, logged out at 6:47 p.m., taken the company shuttle to the parking lot, driven my own car home. My wife made dinner. We watched something on television. I was in bed by 10. The truck sat in the depot lot, locked, engine off, nobody in it. I know this because the depot has perimeter cameras and gate logs, and when I eventually went through all of it, the records confirmed that the truck did not move that night. The gate log showed no exit. The perimeter cameras showed it sitting in the same position from the time I parked it to the time I returned the next morning. The truck did not go anywhere. The dashcam recorded 43 minutes of footage from inside the stationary cab. I found it 3 days later. I check my dashcam footage routinely, not obsessively, just as a habit, the same way I check tire pressure and fluid levels. Professional maintenance of the equipment that keeps me alive. The saved file was timestamped 2:09 a.m. on November 15th, which means whatever triggered the save happened at 2:09 a.m. I plugged the card into my laptop in the kitchen after my wife had gone to bed. I was expecting a malfunction log. Sometimes a power surge or a sensor error triggers a false save. It happens once or twice a year. I pressed play. For the first 4 minutes, nothing. The cab interior in night vision green, the way dashcam footage always looks. Everything slightly phosphorescent, the texture of the seats visible, the steering wheel, the dashboard controls, the windshield showing the dark parking lot beyond, the distant lights of the depot perimeter. Empty. Still. At 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the passenger seat changes. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only thing I have. The seat doesn't move. Nothing visually dramatic happens. What changes is the upholstery, the way it's compressed. The passenger seat goes from displaying the profile of an unoccupied seat, with the cushion at its natural height, to displaying the profile of a seat with weight on it. The indentation is gradual, maybe 4 seconds of change, and then it's static, settled. The way a seat's when a person has been sitting in it long enough for the cushion to adjust. Nothing came through the door. The door doesn't open. There is no figure, no shape, nothing that crosses the camera's field of view. One moment the seat is empty, and the next moment the seat is holding the weight of something that isn't there. At 6 minutes and 40 seconds, the radio turns on. I know the radio turns on because I can see the green glow of the display panel in the footage. Volume low. The station is something with a lot of bass. I can see the small movement of the speakers in the door panels when I zoom in. That slight vibration. I can't hear what's playing. The cab-facing camera doesn't have audio quality good enough to resolve the music, just the ambient sound of an idling electrical system in the distant lot. Then, at 9 minutes and 12 seconds, there is a voice. The audio quality is poor. I want to say that clearly, because when I describe what I heard, I need you to understand that I am not describing something crisp and unambiguous. I am describing something I had to listen to many times, with headphones, with the volume at maximum, before I was certain of what it was. The voice comes from inside the cab, not from outside, not from the radio. The quality is different from the radio static, closer and more direct, the way a voice sounds when the source of it is in the same space as the microphone. It speaks for approximately 4 seconds. It says one sentence. The voice is my son's voice. I need you to understand what I mean when I say that. I don't mean it sounds like him. I don't mean it has similar qualities or reminds me of him. I mean it is his voice, the specific acoustic signature of it, the particular way he shaped vowels, the slight roughness he always had at the start of sentences, a quality I spent years trying to describe and never found the right word for. My son died in 2019. He was 22 years old. A car accident on a road I've driven myself 100 times since, because the only alternative was to let one road own me, and I wasn't willing to do that. He had been gone for 4 years when this footage was recorded. The sentence he says, "I'm not going to tell you what it was. I've told no one what it was. It's mine." That's the only thing about this whole experience I've been able to hold on to as something that belongs to me. Something that hasn't been turned over and examined and offered up as evidence of anything. It was a sentence that meant something specific between him and me. The kind of thing that exists in the private language of a father and a son, accumulated over years of small moments that don't look like anything from the outside but are load-bearing from the inside. He said it. On a dash cam. In an empty truck at 2 a.m. After the voice, the footage shows 7 more minutes of the indented seat. Then, at 16 minutes and 40 seconds, the seat returns to its natural profile. Gradual, 4 seconds, the weight leaving the way it arrived. The radio display goes dark at 16 minutes and 52 seconds. The remaining 26 minutes of footage are an empty cab. I sat at my kitchen table until 4 in the morning. My wife was asleep. I did not wake her. There are some things you need to hold alone first before you can figure out how to hold them with another person. And this was one of those things. I went through everything I could think of. I am not a man who believes easily. My faith, which I was raised with and have maintained in the practiced structural way that you maintain things that matter, has never included a belief in hauntings or communications from the dead. I believe in God, and I believe in the soul, and I believe my son is somewhere that is not here. And those beliefs have never included a mechanism for a 22-year-old's voice appearing on a parking lot dashcam 4 years after his death. My faith doesn't have a folder for this. Audio artifact, interference from a nearby frequency, a voice that resembles his closely enough that grief is filling in the rest. I tested all of those against what I heard. None of them held. I sold the truck 6 weeks later. Told the company I was semi-retiring, moving to shorter hauls, which was true enough. I'd been considering it anyway. The real reason was that I couldn't get back in that cab. I tried once, the week after I found the footage, and I sat in the driver's seat for maybe 3 minutes before I got out. Not because I was frightened of what had been there, because I wasn't. And that frightened me more than anything else. I wanted to sit in the passenger seat. I wanted to be where the weight had been. I wanted to stay there and be in the last place in the physical world where something that carried his voice had been present. And wanting that felt like the beginning of something I wasn't equipped to come back from. So I sold the truck. I kept the footage. I watch it sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my wife is asleep, and the particular kind of grief that doesn't diminish with time, the kind that just learns to wait patiently for you in the small hours, comes to sit with me. I watch the seat change. I watch the display light up. I wait for the 9-minute mark. And every time, without adjustment, without degradation, with the same acoustic certainty that I would know his voice in any room, in any country, in any condition, he says it again. I have driven that road for 31 years. Not the same road in the way that all roads are the same after enough repetition. I mean the specific 2-lane stretch of County Road 11 between the old grain co-op and the water tower at the edge of town. The road I drove to school every morning for 12 years, the road I drove to work for 31 years after that, the road whose every crack and shoulder irregularity I know the way I know the layout of my own kitchen in the dark. The curve where the drainage ditch comes close to the asphalt. The place where a line of box elders crowds the shoulder on the east side and makes it narrow in summer when they're full. The old limestone mile marker that someone painted green decades ago and nobody has repainted since. I know that road. I want to establish that clearly before I tell you what I saw on it, because the knowing matters. The knowing is the whole reason this is difficult to dismiss. I am 62 years old. I taught high school history for 31 years at the same school I attended as a student, which is either dedication or a failure of imagination depending on who you ask. I retired in June. That part is relevant because the night I'm describing was in late October, about 4 months into my retirement, which means it was the first autumn in 31 years that I was not driving that road every morning with a purpose. I was driving it out of habit, the way you keep doing the thing your body learned before your life changed. Same time, same direction, same road, just no destination at the end of it anymore. It was 7:20 in the morning, which in late October in this part of the country means a sky that hasn't fully committed to daylight yet. Not dark, not light, that gray-blue in between that makes distances hard to read and edges soft. The kind of light that makes familiar things look like almost familiar things. I came around the box elder curve doing about 30 miles an hour, which is what you do on that section because the shoulder drop-off on the west side requires respect, and my headlights were still on because of the low light, and the beams caught him about 40 yards ahead. He was standing at the east shoulder, right at the edge of the asphalt, just past where the box elders thin out. Standing with his back slightly angled away from the road, the posture of someone who had been walking and stopped. 17 years old, maybe. Dark jacket, the kind with the school logo on the left chest, the burgundy and white that my school has used since before I started teaching there. The kind of jacket I saw on 1,000 students over 31 years. I recognized him before I understood that I recognized him. That's the thing about the brain and faces. Recognition runs ahead of identity. You know the face before you know the name, before you know why you know it. There's a lag between those three things, and in that lag is where most of the strangeness of that morning lives. I slowed without deciding to slow. My foot moved before my mind had finished its sentence. I was at 20 miles an hour by the time I came level with him, which meant I had a clear view for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. He was looking at the field on the east side of the road. Not at my car, not at the road, at the field, at something in the middle distance that I couldn't identify. His hands were in his jacket pockets. His posture was relaxed in the specific way that young people are relaxed. A looseness in the shoulders, a slight forward lean that looks like perpetual mild readiness to be somewhere else. I looked at his face, and then I was past him, and the road curved slightly and he was behind me. I want to tell you I pulled over immediately. I want to tell you I had the presence of mind to stop the car and process what I'd seen before I drove another mile, with it sitting unexamined in my chest. What I actually did was drive for another quarter mile on autopilot, with both hands tight on the wheel and my eyes on the road ahead, and the particular kind of internal silence that falls when your mind is doing something so large and so fast that it crowds out everything else. Then I pulled over. I knew his face. I knew it the way I knew a few hundred faces from 31 years in the same building, not with the sharp clarity of someone I'd been close to, but with the reliable background familiarity of a student who had been present, who had sat in a specific seat in a specific classroom, who had answered questions and turned in work, and occupied a place in the ecosystem of a school building. He had been in my third period class in the fall of 1994, American history, sat in the second row from the window 2 seats back. Not a remarkable student academically, middle of the distribution, decent enough, the kind of kid who is more present than his grades suggest, and whose mind you can see working even when his hand isn't up. He had a habit of tapping his pen against his knee when he was thinking, which I remembered because I had asked him twice to stop, and he had stopped and then started again without noticing, which told me something about how deeply he went into his own thoughts. He died in November of that year. A car accident on a road 2 counties over. He was 17 years old, and it was a wet road and a curve in the particular terrible arithmetic of young people and speed. The whole school attended the service. I remember the gymnasium, the folding chairs, his parents in the front row, with the specific posture of people who have been hit so hard they have temporarily forgotten how to inhabit their own bodies. That was 1994, 30 years ago. The boy standing on the shoulder of County Road 11 this October morning was 17 years old. I sat on the shoulder for a while with the engine running. A truck went past going the other direction, which reminded me that the world was still operational, that it was a Tuesday morning in October and people were going to work and the ordinary mechanics of the day were proceeding without any acknowledgement of what I had just seen. I checked my mirror. The stretch of road behind me was empty. The box elders were still, no wind. The shoulder where he'd been standing was unoccupied. I thought about the jacket. The school hasn't used that exact version of the logo since the mid-90s. They updated the design in 1998, changed the lettering slightly, and every jacket since then has the new version. What I had seen on his chest was the old version, the version that was current in 1994. I had not thought about the difference between those two logos in years, possibly decades, but I knew at the moment I saw it. The old version, his version. I thought about his age, 17, the age he was when he died, which means the age he has been for 30 years, which is not how time works for the living, but may be, apparently, how it works for whatever this was. I am not a person who uses the word haunting easily. 31 years of teaching history means 31 years of teaching students to interrogate sources, to ask what else could explain the evidence, to resist the interpretation that feels true in favor of the interpretation that holds up. I applied that discipline to what I saw. Similar build, similar jacket, early morning light with its ambiguity. I went through all of it. I was thorough. The face didn't survive the alternative explanations. I know his face. Not perfectly. 30 years is a long time and memory degrades and reshapes itself without telling you. But there is a threshold of recognition that sits below the degradation. Something structural. Something that memory holds even when the details blur. I was at that threshold with his face. I was certain in the way that carries weight. I went home and I found the obituary. Not because I doubted what I'd seen, but because I needed to look at his face in a photograph, needed to check the recognition against something fixed and external rather than against my own 30-year-old memory of a second-row student. The local paper had digitized their archives a few years back. His obituary was there, small, the way they are for young people who haven't had time to accumulate the things obituaries list, survived by, preceded by, professionally known for. Mostly just his name and his age and a photograph. The photograph was his junior year school photo. The same photo that had hung on the gymnasium wall at the service in 1994, the one I had stood in front of for a moment before taking my seat with the other faculty. I looked at it for a long time, same face, same build, same quality of expression. That particular mild readiness I remembered from the second row, the look of someone whose thoughts are slightly ahead of the room. Same jacket. I've driven County Road 11 every morning since then. Retired or not, I drive it. I tell my husband it's habit, and that's true as far as it goes. But the deeper truth is that I'm looking, not with dread. I want to be accurate about that, not with the intention of stopping or approaching or doing anything that would require me to know what to say. Just looking, just acknowledging, with the daily practice of that drive, that he is there in some form I don't have the framework to understand, standing at the edge of a road he once walked, in a jacket that marks the time he was from, and that I saw him, that after 30 years of that road and the ordinary accumulation of seasons on it, I turned a corner one October morning, and he was there, and he was unchanged, and he was real enough to be seen. In 31 years of teaching, I learned that some students stay with you in ways you don't choose and can't control. The ones whose absence leaves a shape in the air of a classroom, a permanent outline of someone who should still be there. He was always one of those. I think on some level, he always knew it. The morning he turned up on that road, he didn't look at me. He looked at the field. But just before the curve took him out of my mirror, just at the edge of my vision, and the edge of what I can be certain of, he raised one hand. Unhurried, easy. The wave of someone who has time. I've been driving that road for 31 years. I think he knows that. I think that's exactly why he was there. The exit sign said County Road 9, and I took it because I was ahead of schedule, and because cartographers, as a professional class, are constitutionally incapable of passing an unmarked road without wanting to know where it goes. That is the most honest explanation I have for why I turned off the interstate at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in March. Professional curiosity dressed up as practicality. I was driving back from a surveying contract in the eastern part of the state. 3 days of fieldwork that had gone smoothly, which put me in the mild, uncomplicated satisfaction of a job completed. And the sign appeared in my headlights, with the particular suddenness that highway exits have when you're running on cruise control and low-level attention. County Road 9. No destination listed. No distance marker. I know every designated county road in this state. That is not an exaggeration or a figure of speech. I have spent 19 years building, maintaining, and auditing road databases for the State Transportation Authority. I know road designations the way musicians know chord progressions, not by consulting a reference but by having internalized the system so completely that gaps in it produce an immediate involuntary response. The response is mild wrongness, a small friction in the mental model, the cartographic equivalent of a wrong note. This state does not have a County Road 9 in this region. I took the exit. The off-ramp was standard, concrete, slightly weathered. The reflective lane markers faded to the degree you'd expect on a road that gets moderate use and maintenance attention on a 3-year cycle. Everything consistent with a legitimate county road in this part of the state. I noted the surface texture, the shoulder width, the grade of the drainage ditch, all normal. All within the parameters of county infrastructure built in the mid-1980s, which is when most of this region's secondary road network was formalized. At the base of the ramp there was a junction sign, standard green, white lettering, the correct typeface for state road signage, a detail that matters because counterfeit or informal signage uses slightly different proportions. And I have looked at enough signs in enough context to notice the difference immediately. This was real signage. Properly manufactured, properly installed. It said County Road 9, north 0.4 miles, south 7.2 miles. I pulled over and took out my phone. Opened the state road database application I use for fieldwork. Searched County Road 9 in this county. No results. I searched adjacent counties. No results. I searched the entire state designation system for any County Road 9 in any jurisdiction. No results. The sign in front of me listed a road that did not exist in any database I had access to, using signage that met every official specification on infrastructure that met every physical standard. I sat with that for a moment. Then I turned north. The 0. 4 miles to the first intersection was unremarkable. The road ran through open farmland, flat, winter fallow fields on both sides, the bare soil pale in my headlights. No structures visible, no lights anywhere on the horizon except the distant orange wash of the interstate I'd left behind. At the intersection there was another sign, a crossroad, no designation listed, just an arrow pointing east labeled Millhaven and an arrow pointing west with no label at all. I searched Millhaven in the county records on my phone. No results. I noted this in the small field notebook I keep in the center console. I record observations by habit. 19 years of fieldwork has made documentation as automatic as breathing. I wrote CR9 JCT unlisted crossroad. Millhaven ref not in county records. Time 11:52 p.m. I noted the mileage on my odometer 8447. I continued north. The road changed character after the intersection. The farmland gave way to a tree corridor. Not old growth. Not the dense canopy of established woodland, but the particular type of tree growth you get on land that was cleared at some point and then left alone long enough for secondary growth to establish. 30-40 years of unmanaged succession. The trees came close to the shoulder on both sides, and the road narrowed slightly, not dramatically but measurably. I estimated it at about 8 feet of usable lane width versus the standard 10 on the southern section. I noted this. I also noted at mile 1.3 from the interstate, the first road sign with a place name I recognized. It was a green highway-style sign, the same specification as everything else on this road, mounted on the standard galvanized post. It said Carver Junction 3 miles. Carver Junction is a real place, an unincorporated community about 12 miles west of where I was, accessible via State Route 44. I know it because I surveyed the road network in that area 7 years ago and spent 2 days mapping the junction's approach geometry. Carver Junction is not accessible from this direction. There is no road connecting Carver Junction to this part of the county. The geography doesn't permit it. There's a river drainage system in between that has no bridge crossing in this corridor. I noted. Carver JCT. Sign at 1.3 mi. Geographic impossibility. Actual CJ location. Mileage 84,448.4. I kept driving. The documentation was keeping me functional. I want to be honest about this. By this point, something in my chest had taken on a quality I associate with fieldwork errors. The specific anxiety of discovering that your dataset contains a fundamental inconsistency that can't be resolved by rechecking your instruments. It's not panic, it's a cold, focused unease that makes you methodical. I photographed every sign, I noted every mileage reading. I logged the road surface transitions, the tree line changes, the drainage characteristics. I was building a record. That is what I do when the world doesn't add up. I record it carefully and completely, because the record is the only thing that will survive my own fallibility. At mile 2.1, I passed a bridge, small, concrete, single lane, crossing a drainage channel about 8 feet wide. Nothing remarkable about the bridge except that the drainage channel it crossed ran in a direction that had no relationship to the watershed I knew from the county maps. Water in this region drains northeast to southwest following the underlying geology. This channel ran east to west. I stopped on the bridge and looked at the water in my headlights. The surface was moving, which means it was flowing, which means it had a source and a destination. I could not account for either. I noted this and drove on. At mile 3.0, the road ended. Not a intersection, not a dead end with a turnaround. It ended the way a sentence ends, with finality and intention, the road surface simply terminating at a gravel apron in front of a gate. Metal gate, the tubular farm gate type, painted green. A chain through the bars, padlocked. Beyond the gate, in my headlights, a gravel track continuing into the trees. On the gate there was a sign. Not a highway sign, a smaller sign, the kind you buy at a hardware store, white background with black text. It said, road ends, private property beyond this point. I stopped and got out. I do not know exactly why I got out. The documentation impulse, the need to photograph the gate, the need to be physically present at the end of a road that shouldn't exist. I stood in front of the gate with my phone and photographed it, and then turned around and photographed the road behind me. The tunnel of trees, the pale gravel surface retreating into the dark. It was quiet in the specific way that places are quiet when there has been no human activity in them for a long time. Not peaceful quiet, absence quiet, the kind of silence that isn't resting but empty. I took 47 photographs that night. I have counted them many times. I drove back the same way I'd come. Every sign still present, every mileage reading consistent with my outbound log. At the base of the off-ramp, I rejoined the interstate and continued west toward home. I arrived at 1:34 a.m. I was not distressed. Exactly, I was occupied. My mind was running the data, looking for the resolution, the point at which the inconsistency collapses into something explainable. I spent 4 days on it. The road does not exist in any database I can access. State transportation records, county engineering files, historical survey maps going back to the 1930s, USG's topographic records, aerial survey archives, nothing. County Road 9 in that corridor appears in none of them. The signage I photographed meets every official specification. The physical infrastructure I documented is real and maintained. Something built it and something maintains it, and nobody in any official capacity knows it exists. On the 5th day I reviewed the photographs. I went through them in sequence, the way you review fieldwork documentation, systematically, frame by frame, with the same attention you give to any dataset that may contain the answer to a problem you haven't solved yet. The road, the signs, the bridge, the gate. In the 41st photograph, at the edge of the tree corridor where the secondary growth is thickest, there is a figure, standing at the tree line approximately 30 feet from the road surface, facing the road. I did not see it when I took the photograph. I was looking at the gate. The figure is in the background, slightly soft in the focus plane but present, upright, human-shaped, oriented toward the camera. I went back through the previous photographs. The figure is in 30 of them. Not always the same position, it moves between frames, repositioning along the tree line, sometimes closer to the road, sometimes further back. In the photographs taken facing south, toward the interstate, it is visible at the edge of frame. In the photographs facing north, it is behind me, at the southern tree line. It is always at the same relative distance. It is always facing the road. It is always facing me. I have not reported this to anyone at the Transportation Authority. I have thought carefully about what reporting it would require, presenting the photographs, explaining the road, accounting for how a county road with full signage and maintained infrastructure exists in a corridor where no road should exist, and where no record of construction or maintenance can be found. I have thought about what questions would follow, and whether I have answers that would satisfy them. I don't. What I have is 47 photographs and a field notebook with 17 entries and a mileage log that documents a 3.0-mile road that my 19 years of institutional knowledge tell me cannot be there. And 30 photographs of something that was there the entire time I was driving that road, standing in the trees at a consistent distance, watching. I drove that road alone. That is what I believed when I was on it. The silence, the absence, the dark. All of it pointed toward a place where nothing was present except the road and my headlights and the methodical work of documentation. 30 photographs say otherwise. Whatever was in those trees, it was never going to appear in my headlights. It wasn't standing at the shoulder. It wasn't in the road. It stayed in the trees in the dark at exactly the distance required to remain invisible to a man who was looking carefully at everything except the tree line. It knew where I wasn't looking. That's the part I come back to, late at night, when the field notebook is open on my desk and the photographs are arranged in sequence, and I am trying, again, to find the explanation that makes this ordinary. It knew exactly where I wasn't looking, and it followed me for 3 miles anyway. That's 10 roads, 10 nights that didn't end the way they were supposed to. And the thing that stays with me, after all of them, is this. These aren't stories from horror movies or paperback novels. These are people who just got in their cars, just like you do, just like I do. If these accounts kept you up tonight, good. You should be. I'm Mr. Darkveil. Don't drive alone.